You need to come with me, immigration enforcement.
Immigration, this is a federal courthouse. I'm a retired federal judge.
I don't care who you are. You're coming with me.
You should care. I wrote the statute you're citing. Section 2, you have a warrant?
5 words. That was all it took. 18 federal security cameras recorded that sentence. 3 Department of Justice attorneys heard it, and an 11-year-old boy captured it on his iPad sitting 10 feet from his grandmother. That exchange would cost this agent his career, his freedom, and the federal government $24.1 million. He had just told a woman who spent 31 years on the federal bench that warrants don't matter. If you're watching because you believe the law should apply to those who enforce it, subscribe now. These stories need to be seen. Drop where you're watching from, because what 18 cameras caught next proved that badges don't outrank the Constitution. Judge Eleanor Dawson had spent 31 years deciding immigration cases from the federal bench, handling 4,600 cases with an overturn rate of just 2.3%. 3 provisions in the Immigration Reform Act carry her name in the margins, cited over 1,200 times in case law across the country. She taught immigration law at Howard University for 12 years. 2 Presidential Medal of Freedom nominations. The kind of career most attorneys dream about and never reach. That Wednesday morning, she arrived at the federal courthouse at 10:47 for a Department of Justice symposium on immigration reform. She was the keynote speaker. Her name was printed on the guest registry. Her retired judge badge sat in her wallet. Her grandson Marcus, 11 years old, walked beside her. He'd asked to come. He wanted to watch his grandmother speak one last time before she stepped away from public life for good. He carried an iPad and the quiet pride of a boy who understood his grandmother mattered. The lobby held 14 people. 3 DOJ attorneys reviewed their notes near the conference entrance. A U.S. Marshal staffed the security desk. 18 cameras monitored every angle. Into the scene walked Agent Kyle Brannigan. No check-in at reception. No contact with the marshals who controlled the building. He scanned the lobby and locked onto his target, a black woman, elderly, standing near the conference hall. The warrant in his folder described someone named Elaine Davidson, age 39, last known address in Atlanta, Georgia. Judge Dawson was 75. She had never lived in Atlanta. Her name was on the speaker board 6 feet from where Brannigan stood. He never looked up. I need to see identification. Proof of citizenship. Dawson looked at him the way she had looked at unprepared attorneys for 3 decades. Calm, precise, devastating. Proof of citizenship in a federal courthouse. May I see your warrant first? Brannigan pulled the document from his folder and held it up without handing it over. Dawson extended her hand. He hesitated, then passed it to her. She read it in 4 seconds. 31 years of reading warrants will do that. This warrant is for Elaine Davidson, age 39, residing in Atlanta. I'm Eleanor Dawson. I'm 75. I've never lived in Georgia. You have the wrong person, the wrong name, the wrong age, in the wrong state. Names get misspelled, Brannigan said. His voice carried the flat certainty of someone who had already decided. Names get misspelled. Dawson repeated his words back like a judge reading a verdict. Ages don't change by 36 years. And this warrant doesn't authorize action inside a federal courthouse without coordinating with the U.S. Marshal Service. Did you coordinate with anyone in this building? Silence. I'll take that as a no. Camera 7 captured Marcus lifting his iPad. The screen faced Brannigan directly. 11 years old, hands steady, recording everything. 3 DOJ attorneys rose from their seats and approached. The tallest, a woman in her 50s, spoke first. Agent, I'm Patricia Holden, Department of Justice. This is Judge Eleanor Dawson. She's our keynote speaker today. She authored the immigration enforcement provisions you are presumably operating under. I strongly suggest you verify your warrant before proceeding. Dawson didn't wait for Brannigan's response. She quoted from memory, her voice carrying across the lobby, the way it had carried across courtrooms for decades. Under Section 287G, agents conducting enforcement actions inside federal facilities must coordinate with facility security and confirm identity through at least 2 independent verification methods before initiating detention. I wrote that provision. You've completed 0 of those steps. 18 cameras recorded what Brannigan said next. I don't care about titles. I don't care who wrote what. I have authority to enforce immigration law. Patricia Holden's voice sharpened. You have authority constrained by the procedures this woman authored. Procedures you're violating right now on camera in a federal building full of attorneys. Brannigan didn't step back. Let's pause here. They're still in the courthouse lobby. 6 minutes have passed since Brannigan walked in. 14 people are watching. 3 DOJ attorneys are documenting. An 11-year-old boy is recording on his iPad. 18 federal cameras are capturing every angle. And Agent Brannigan reached for his handcuffs. You're being detained pending identity verification, he said. Dawson looked at the handcuffs, then at her grandson. Marcus stood frozen, iPad still raised, watching a stranger threaten to handcuff his grandmother in the building where she had served for 3 decades. Agent. She spoke slowly. I'm going to tell you something, and I want the cameras to record it clearly. You are about to handcuff a retired federal judge who has presented her identity, whose name is on the guest registry behind you, whose photograph hangs on the 3rd floor of this building, and who is standing next to 3 Department of Justice attorneys who can verify her identity in 10 seconds. If you put those handcuffs on me, you will be committing false arrest, deprivation of rights under color of law, and assault on an elderly person, all on federal camera. She paused. I've sentenced agents for less than what you're about to do. The lobby went quiet. 14 people held their breath. Marcus kept recording. The cameras kept rolling. Patricia Holden pulled out her phone and dialed the U.S. Marshal's office 2 floors up. Brannigan looked at the handcuffs in his hand. He looked at the cameras above him. He looked at the attorneys watching him. He should have stopped. He didn't. The handcuffs clicked around her left wrist first. 75 years old, standing in a federal courthouse where her photograph hung on the 3rd floor, handcuffed by an agent who never read his own warrant. That's my grandma. Marcus's voice cut through the lobby. She's a judge. She's a real judge. Why are you doing that? Step back, kid. Brannigan didn't look at him. Marcus didn't step back. The iPad stayed raised. 11-year-old hands trembling now, but still recording. Camera 9 caught his face, not crying. Something worse than crying. The kind of confusion that happens when a child watches the world stop making sense. Dawson felt the second cuff close around her right wrist. She didn't pull away. She didn't raise her voice. 31 years on the bench had taught her exactly what to do when power operates without law. She spoke clearly, facing camera 4 directly. I am not resisting. My name is Judge Eleanor Dawson, retired United States District Court. I am being unlawfully detained in a federal courthouse by an ICE agent who has presented a warrant for a different person. The warrant names Elaine Davidson, age 39, Atlanta, Georgia. I am 75 years old. I have never lived in Georgia. This agent has not coordinated with the U.S. Marshal Service as required by federal facility protocol. I am stating for the record that this detention is without legal basis. Every word precise, every clause deliberate. She wasn't speaking to Brannigan anymore. She was building her own case file in real time, dictating evidence into 18 federal microphones while standing in handcuffs. Patricia Holden had her phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was low and urgent. She was calling the marshal's office on the 2nd floor. 2 other DOJ attorneys documented on their phones. The lobby receptionist sat frozen behind the desk, hand over her mouth. Brannigan gripped Dawson's arm and began walking her toward the exit. That was his plan. Remove her from the building. Process her at the field office. Sort out the details later. It had worked before with people who didn't know their rights, who didn't have attorneys watching, who didn't have 18 cameras recording from every angle. It would not work today. The elevator doors opened at 10:53. 2 U.S. Marshals stepped into the lobby. Deputy Marshal James Whitfield led. His body camera activated automatically as he assessed the scene. It took him 30 seconds. He saw a 75-year-old woman in handcuffs. He saw an ICE agent gripping her arm. He saw 3 DOJ attorneys with phones raised. He saw an 11-year-old boy holding an iPad, standing alone watching his grandmother being led away. He saw the guest registry on the reception desk with Judge Dawson's name printed as keynote speaker. 30 seconds. That was all a trained federal officer needed to read what Brannigan had ignored for 11 minutes. Agent. Whitfield's voice carried the authority of someone who controlled every square foot of the building they stood in. Release this woman immediately. You are in a federal courthouse under Marshal Service jurisdiction. You have not coordinated your presence. You have not presented valid documentation, and the woman you are detaining is Judge Eleanor Dawson, a retired federal jurist whose name is on our speaker schedule today. This is an ICE matter, Brannigan said. Federal Immigration Authority. Whitfield stepped forward. One step. The lobby went silent. This is my building. ICE conducts no operations in a federal courthouse without Marshal Service coordination. That's not a suggestion. That's 28 CFR Section 0.111. Release her now, or I'm placing you under arrest for unlawful detention in a federal facility. The cameras captured Brannigan's face. 6 angles recorded the exact moment he understood. Not that he was wrong. He'd been wrong since he walked through the front door. This was the moment he understood that everyone else knew. He unlocked the handcuffs. They fell away from her wrists. Camera 12 caught the marks. Red lines pressed into 75-year-old skin. Skin that had held a gavel. Skin that had signed rulings protecting constitutional rights. Marked by steel because an agent couldn't be bothered to read a name. Dawson rubbed her wrist slowly. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Marcus ran to her. The iPad dropped to his side as he wrapped his arms around her waist, pressing his face against her ribbon jacket. Camera 9 recorded it. Camera 11 recorded it. The iPad on the floor recorded the ceiling tiles, 14 witnesses, 18 cameras, 3 DOJ attorneys, 2 U.S. Marshals, 1 retired federal judge, 1 11-year-old boy, and Brannigan walked out. No apology, no acknowledgement. His footsteps echoed across the marble lobby as cameras 1 and 2 tracked him through the doors he never should have entered. The lobby stayed quiet for a long time after he left. Should a badge give anyone the right to handcuff a 75-year-old woman who wrote the law they enforce in front of her 11-year-old grandchild? Think about that, because what came next would prove that cameras remember what agents choose to forget. The lawsuit was filed within 72 hours, not by Judge Dawson alone. By Judge Dawson, the Nikanju Federal Justice Initiative, and the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, which took the extraordinary step of supporting a case against a fellow federal agency. The evidence package was unlike anything the court had seen. 18 federal security cameras providing continuous multi-angle footage, audio recordings from the courthouse's built-in microphone system, an 11-year-old boy's iPad video capturing 7 uninterrupted minutes, sworn statements from 3 Department of Justice attorneys who witnessed the entire incident, body camera footage from 2 U.S. Marshals documenting the intervention. Legal analysts called it the most comprehensively documented civil rights violation in a federal building in modern history. The case was Eleanor Dawson versus Kyle Brannigan, United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement in the Department of Homeland Security. The complaint alleged false arrest, deprivation of rights under color of authority, assault on an elderly person, failure to follow federal facility protocols, and racial profiling. Every allegation had camera footage attached. Brannigan's deposition lasted 6 hours. The transcript destroyed any hope of defense within the first 40 minutes. He admitted he had not read the complete warrant before entering the courthouse. He admitted the warrant named Elaine Davidson, not Eleanor Dawson. He admitted the subject was listed as 39 years old. He admitted he had not contacted the Marshal Service. He admitted he had not checked the courthouse guest registry. He admitted he had not asked Dawson for identification before announcing detention. Then came the question that ended his career. Agent Brannigan, there were multiple people in that lobby. What made you approach Judge Dawson specifically? She fit the general profile. The attorney paused. Let the silence build. The deposition camera kept recording. A 75-year-old retired federal judge in a federal courthouse fits the general profile of a 39-year-old woman from Atlanta. Brannigan had no answer. The cameras in the deposition room captured him staring at the table. 12 seconds of silence that would be replayed in every legal briefing about the case. She fit the general profile. 4 words that confirmed what 18 cameras had already shown. He didn't approach her because of evidence. He didn't approach her because the warrant matched. He approached her because she was black. Discovery revealed what the cameras couldn't. Brannigan's personnel file. 4 formal complaints of racial profiling in 3 years. 2 written warnings. A supervisor's note recommending additional training that was never completed. A pattern documented in paper long before it was documented on camera. 4 complaints, 2 warnings, 0 consequences. until he walked into a courthouse full of cameras and handcuffed a woman who knew more about immigration law than anyone in his entire chain of command. Brannigan was terminated. Then the criminal referral came. Federal prosecutors charged him with deprivation of rights under color of law, a felony carrying up to 10 years. The same statute Judge Dawson had applied in her own courtroom dozens of times throughout her career. The irony was surgical. The law she upheld for 31 years would now be used to prosecute the man who violated her rights. The case settled before trial. The government calculated the cost of defending the indefensible across 18 camera angles and decided the math didn't work. $24.1 million. $16.3 million to Judge Dawson for false arrest civil rights violation, emotional distress, and assault. $7.8 million to establish a federal reform fund for ICE operational protocols in federal buildings. The largest individual settlement for a civil rights violation by ICE in a federal facility. An agent with 4 prior complaints received 2 written warnings and kept his badge long enough to handcuff a retired federal judge on camera in front of her grandson. Termination came after. Criminal charges came after. Was that enough, or was it years too late? Comment your take, because the system had 4 chances to stop Kyle Brannigan before Judge Dawson had to stop him herself. The 18 camera recordings were classified as mandatory training material within 90 days. Every ICE agent operating in a federal jurisdiction is now required to view the footage as part of annual certification. The training module is titled Dawson Protocol. It carries her name the way the statute carries her name. Except this time, the lesson isn't written in legal code. It's written in camera footage of an elderly woman being handcuffed in her own courthouse. New federal procedure requires that any ICE agent conducting enforcement in a federal building must complete 3 steps before approaching a subject. Verify identity through at least 2 independent sources. Coordinate with the U.S. Marshals Service or facility security. Confirm warrant specifics, match the individual, including name, age, and jurisdiction. 3 steps. The 3 steps Brannigan skipped because he believed his badge was enough. The $7.8 million reform fund has trained over 2,200 agents in its first 18 months. Federal courthouse incident reports involving ICE dropped 61% in the year following implementation. 61%. Because one woman stood in handcuffs and spoke into cameras with the precision of someone who had spent her life making law work. Judge Dawson allocated her settlement with the same deliberation she brought to the bench. She established the Dawson Legal Defense Scholarship at Howard University, fully funding 12 students per year pursuing immigration law and civil rights litigation. Black students who would learn the law not just from textbooks, but from a woman who experienced what happens when the law fails to protect the people who wrote it. At the announcement, she said 7 sentences. The cameras were rolling because cameras always rolled around Eleanor Dawson now. I wrote the law so it would protect everyone. Every person in every courthouse, every immigrant, every citizen, every elder. When that law failed to protect me, I didn't abandon it. I used it to protect the next generation. Because the law doesn't fail. People fail the law. Marcus's iPad footage traveled further than anyone expected. The 7-minute recording was entered into evidence during a congressional hearing on ICE reform protocols 14 months after the incident. Marcus sat beside his grandmother in the hearing room. 12 years old now, wearing a suit holding the same iPad. The committee chair asked if he wanted to make a statement. He did. I watched them handcuff my grandmother for being black in her own courthouse. She taught me the law is supposed to protect people. That day it didn't protect her. But she used it anyway. She used it standing in handcuffs. If she can do that, I can sit here and tell you what I saw. The hearing room was silent for 11 seconds. Congressional cameras captured every face. That testimony contributed to 3 new amendments in the Federal Facility Enforcement Reform Act, requiring independent oversight of ICE operations in courthouses, mandatory body cameras during all enforcement actions, and immediate identity verification protocols matching the Dawson standard. 3 amendments. Because an 11-year-old boy didn't put down his iPad, Judge Dawson still visits the federal courthouse every Tuesday, not as a judge, as a volunteer. She teaches a free legal literacy program for community members who want to understand their rights inside federal buildings. The classes meet in the same lobby where she was handcuffed. The 18 cameras still record. The guest registry still lists her name every week, and every time she walks through those doors, courthouse staff stand. not because protocol requires it. Because they watched a woman in handcuffs defend the Constitution with more precision than the agent who swore to uphold it. The woman who wrote immigration law was arrested by someone who never read it. 18 cameras caught everything. $24.1 million was the price. But the real cost was an 11-year-old boy learning that his grandmother's expertise, her decades of service, her lifetime of contribution meant nothing to a man with a badge and an unread warrant. If you believe cameras hold power accountable, subscribe. Share the story so the next agent who reaches for handcuffs thinks twice about who they're reaching for. And drop in the comments, what case should we cover next? Because the cameras are always recording, the question is whether anyone is watching.